The single most profitable decision a ski resort company ever made had nothing to do with skiing. It was buying dozens of unrelated mountains scattered across entirely different mountain ranges, in some cases, entirely different hemispheres. A decision that looks like reckless empire building and turns out to be the only reason a resort company survives a single bad winter at all. You think a ski resort makes its money selling lift tickets to people sliding down snow? What it's actually selling is a bet on where snow will fall this particular year, and the smartest operators stopped betting on any one mountain a long time ago. If breakdowns like this are useful to you, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because we take apart the real economics behind a different business or asset just like this one every single time. Start with the fact that there isn't just one kind of ski resort business. There's the small independent mountain, one lift system, one town, entirely dependent on however much snow falls on that specific slope in that specific season. There's the real estate developer who builds condos and vacation homes around a mountain, using the lifts and trails less as the product and more as the amenity that makes the land worth more. And there's the modern consolidated operator, owning dozens of resorts across multiple countries and both hemispheres, treating any single mountain's bad season as a rounding error absorbed by all the others. 3 completely different businesses, and only one of them has figured out how to survive a genuinely bad winter without going under. Here's where the naive mental model breaks down. You think the expensive part is building the chairlifts, the gondolas, the base lodge. That part, once built, mostly just needs maintenance. The genuinely expensive part is the snow itself, or more precisely, manufacturing it when nature doesn't cooperate. A single resort's snowmaking system can cost tens of millions of dollars to build, and running it eats enormous amounts of water and electricity every single night. Temperatures allow it sometimes for weeks before a single paying guest shows up. Nature used to be the free input. Now it's the thing resorts spend the most engineering effort replacing. The scale of that snowmaking investment is easy to underestimate. A major resort can run thousands of individual snow guns simultaneously, each one pulling from a reservoir system built specifically to store enough water for the season. Powered by pumping stations that can draw several megawatts at peak operation, roughly enough electricity to run a small town. All of that infrastructure exists to manufacture something that used to simply fall from the sky for free. The irony is that as winters trend warmer and less predictable, the resorts best positioned to survive are the ones who already spent the most money treating snow as a manufactured product rather than a natural guarantee. Here's the part almost nobody prices in correctly when they imagine owning a mountain. Weather variance isn't a minor operating risk. It's the central risk the entire business is built around, and it's getting worse. A resort can have a spectacular season one year and a catastrophic one the next, with revenue swinging by enormous percentages based on nothing the company did differently, purely because of how much snow happened to fall that winter. Rising average temperatures mean more of that snow increasingly has to be manufactured rather than fallen, which means the cost of staying open climbs every year, even as the free input it used to rely on becomes less reliable. Scientific projections for some major ski regions suggest average snowpack could shrink significantly over the coming decades if current warming trends continue, meaning the resorts still relying on nature to do most of the work may simply run out of season length before they run out of customers. So how does a modern ski resort actually make its money? Increasingly, not from the lift ticket window at all. In 2008, Vail Resorts launched something called the Ikon Pass, a season pass sold months in advance, often at a steep discount to what daily lift tickets would eventually cost, betting that guaranteed cash collected in the off-season was worth more than maximizing the price of any single ski day. It worked well enough that a rival collection of resorts launched a competing pass a decade later, and today, the two passes between them cover a huge share of skiable terrain in North America. The genius of the model is that the resort gets paid whether or not the pass holder ever shows up, and whether or not it snows. By some industry estimates, pass revenue collected before the season even begins, now, accounts for a majority of many large resort operators' total lift-related revenue, a complete inversion of how the business worked as recently as the 1990s, when almost everything was sold one lift ticket at a time, one day at a time, entirely at the mercy of how good that particular week's snow happened to be. Vail wasn't operating in a vacuum once the Epic Pass proved the model worked. In 2018, a separate company called Altera Mountain Company assembled its own portfolio of independent resorts, including places like Steamboat, Winter Park, and Mammoth, and launched a direct rival called as the Ikon Pass, built on the identical logic, sell guaranteed access in advance, spread the weather risk across dozens of mountains, and make the pass itself the product instead of any single day of skiing. Within a few years, the ski industry in North America had effectively consolidated around two competing multi-mountain pass ecosystems, and any resort that stayed outside both increasingly found itself competing for guests against operators who no longer needed a good local winter to make their year. Here's the part of this business that flips the naive assumption on its head. For a lot of resort operators, skiing was never really the product. It was the marketing expense that made the real product valuable. The real product is the real estate. A condo or a vacation home built at the base of a mountain with a working lift system sells for dramatically more than the identical structure built somewhere without one. And the company that owns both the mountain and the land around it captures that markup directly. Some of the most successful resort companies in history built their entire strategy around exactly this, treating the ski operation as an amenity that inflates the value of the land they were really in, the business of selling. A company called Intrawest built its entire strategy around this real estate logic decades before it became conventional wisdom. Through the 1990s and 2000s, it developed the base villages at resorts like Whistler, Steamboat, Winter Park, and Mont Tremblant, constructing entire pedestrian towns of shops, hotels, and condos anchored by a working ski lift, then selling the real estate at a premium that the lift system alone could never have justified. The lift ticket was never really the business. It was the amenity that made every square foot of land around it worth dramatically more. And Intrawest built and sold that difference in value again and again across an entire portfolio of mountains. That diversification isn't theoretical. It happened in real recent deals. In 2016, Vail Resorts paid roughly $1 billion to acquire Whistler Blackcomb, already one of the largest and most reliably snowy resorts in North America, adding an entire second country to the portfolio in a single transaction. A year earlier, it had bought Perisher in Australia, a resort whose ski season runs from June through October, the exact opposite half of the calendar from every resort the company already owned in the Northern Hemisphere. A pass holder skiing Colorado in January and Australia in August isn't just getting more vacation options. They're the reason the company's cash flow keeps arriving in months when every Northern Hemisphere mountain in the portfolio sits closed and generating nothing. There's a reason resorts spend so much energy funneling guests toward everything except the chairlift. Food and beverage, equipment rental, ski school lessons, and on-mountain lodging routinely generate as much revenue per visitor as the lift ticket itself, sometimes more. And none of that ancillary spending requires selling a single additional ticket. A family of 4 renting skis, taking a lesson, eating lunch on the mountain, and staying in resort-owned lodging for the weekend can spend several times the cost of their lift passes before they ever leave. And unlike the ticket price, none of that spending is capped by what a competitor down the road is charging for a day pass. Now let's talk about what happens to the operators who never solved the weather problem. Since the mid-1980s, the number of operating ski areas in the United States has fallen by roughly a third, from somewhere around 700 down to under 500 today. Almost all of it, small independent mountains that couldn't survive one bad winter without the cash reserves, snowmaking budget, or diversified terrain a larger company could fall back on. It wasn't that people stopped wanting to ski. It's that a single mountain betting everything on its own local snowfall every single year was always one disappointing winter away from a financial crisis that a portfolio of 40 mountains across 3 countries simply never has to face. It wasn't a dramatic collapse so much as a slow, quiet attrition, one small mountain at a time, deciding it couldn't justify another season of snowmaking bills against a winter that might not deliver enough paying skiers to cover them, until entire regions that once had a dozen local ski hills were left with 2 or 3 survivors, almost always the ones with either deep pockets or a bigger portfolio standing behind them. By the 2020s, Vail Resorts had grown from a single Colorado mountain into a company operating several dozen resorts spread across the United States, Canada, Australia, and Switzerland, run less like a collection of individual ski hills and more like a single recurring revenue subscription business that happens to deliver its product on a mountain instead of a screen. Investors increasingly valued the company less on how much snow fell in any given year, and more on how many passes it had already sold. Months before winter even arrived, the same shift in logic that turned a seasonal, weather-dependent business into something that behaves on a spreadsheet a lot more like a software company. So if you're pricing what it actually takes to own a ski resort, remember the one thing that actually determines whether you survive. It was never really about how good the skiing was on your mountain in any given year. The snow was never the product. It was whether you'd built something, a season pass, a real estate portfolio, a spread of resorts across enough different weather systems that didn't depend on any single mountain having a good winter. And the operators who never built that are the ones who don't exist anymore. The mountain was always just the venue. The math was won or lost in a spreadsheet, built months before the first snowflake fell, by whoever had already spread their bet wide enough that any single disappointing winter couldn't touch them. If this breakdown was useful, subscribe for more videos like it, leave a like, and tell us in the comments what you thought. And if you know someone who'd find this interesting, send it their way.